So I'm Geoff White. I'm an author, an investigative journalist, and I'm the author of a new book which is coming out called The Lazarus Heist. That's been published in June 2022. Well, I wrote a book a couple of years ago called crime.com, which was all about cybercrime. It was how cybercrime has become this big global threat. And one of the chapters of that book was about North Korea and how North Korea became a sort of global cyber superpower. And there was one particular story about North Korean hackers, which is kind of legendary in the tech security field. This is how North Korea's government hackers are alleged to have targeted Bangladesh Bank, the national bank of that country, and tried to steal $1 billion. And it's an amazing story. It's almost as though a bunch of computer hackers have seen a heist movie, a Hollywood heist movie, and thought to themselves, we can do that, but with computers. And it's absolutely incredible tale. So that chapter of the book got turned into a BBC World Service podcast series called The Lazarus Heist, which was broadcast from April 2021. And then off the back of that series, there was obviously a lot more to say about what the North Koreans have been up to and the allegations against them. And so I wrote a book, and that expands massively on the podcast series and goes into all the sort of twists and turns of what the North Korean hackers are alleged to have got up to over the last few years. One of the problems for government and law enforcement agencies in tackling computer hackers and dark web actors, dark web entities, is that these people don't know any borders. They don't recognize any borders. So in some of the cases I've covered, you have a North Korean hacker alleged to have broken into a bank in South Africa and siphoned the money off to be withdrawn in the US and Turkey and the Russian Federation. Well, instantly there you've got several jurisdictions that all need to cooperate together to investigate that theft. And that's not easy to do. You have to cooperate around the world and collaborate. And law enforcement agencies and governments struggle to do that. They just don't have the networks often to do that. Whereas the computer hackers absolutely do. They've got this thing, the dark web, and encrypted communication channels, things like Telegram, where they can use to swap information. So that's one of the big headaches for governments and law enforcement. So the key to it is more collaboration, more get-togethers, more international conferences, more forums and networks where law enforcement and government agencies around the world can come together, get to know each other, communicate together, so that when these accidents and incidents do happen, the governments and law enforcement agencies are able to get on the case with them and solve those cases much quicker. One of the things about being an investigative journalist is I'm often trying to find people, and usually people who don't particularly want to be found. And so one of the things I find slightly frightening and bewildering is the ease with which you can find people. You can find people's mobile phone numbers, you can find people's email addresses and get in touch with them. Now, my motivations are, I think, fairly benign and fairly positive and good. I'm a journalist trying to get hold of people to get their story and to ask them questions. And I'm not pretending to be anyone I'm not. I'm honest with people and say, look, I'm a journalist trying to get hold of you. But it does strike me that the ease with which I'm finding out people's personal information and contacting them can also be used by hackers, by fraudsters, by scammers to get hold of people, pretending to be somebody who's trying to help them out, trying to give them an offer, trying to offer them some great deal, and then scamming them and defrauding their money. So that level of the amount of personal information and private data that's available and out there to be grabbed does really, really worry me. And I don't see any moves against that. From what I can see, every year, more and more personal information, more and more personal data is allowed out and is leaked out either by hackers or by companies themselves making it available. And so that picture seems to get worse and worse for me. Well, the Twitter story is a really interesting one, and the Elon Musk development is yet another interesting twist on that. We've already seen over the last few days Elon Musk saying that he thinks the decision to ban former US President Donald J. Trump from Twitter was the wrong decision. And I think in his mind, he'd want to reverse that decision. I will say, though, Elon Musk, although he owns the company, is still answerable to Twitter's board and also Twitter's ultimate shareholders. And if Elon Musk's personal decisions and his personal drivers and motivations start to clash with the company's valuation, its market valuation, its shareholder satisfaction, he could find himself receiving a great deal of pushback on that. The other thing is that Twitter's brought in various systems and various methods and various ways to help try and police the platform and control the platform. I think Twitter realized, particularly around the US presidential election and subsequent events, that it could be used to foment protest and that wouldn't go very well. So again, those systems and controls that have been put in place at Twitter are also something that Elon Musk would have to dismantle. That's going to get spotted by a lot of people. And again, he may get pushback on that. So it's going to be interesting to see how Elon Musk handles his top seat at the top table at Twitter right now. In terms of freedom of speech, I'm sure some people say this is absolutely fantastic. He's firmly in favor of freedom of speech. For other people, that freedom of speech is part of the problem. Policing that is something that you do need to think about quite hard and think about how you're actually going to do it. So it's going to be interesting to see where Elon Musk ends up on this one. The relationship between emerging technologies and things like privacy and security, it's a cat and mouse game. So as each emerging technology advance comes into play and comes to fruition, that's going to have a knock-on effect on privacy and security. But those industries then develop something, invent something that makes them a bit more safe and a bit more stable until the next technological leap comes along. So quantum computing is a perfect example. Quantum computing will ruin a great deal of the encryption technology, the scrambling technology that sits behind the security of our transactions, the privacy of our messages as we send them to and from each other, the security of our banking data as it's sent to and from the bank. Now, at the moment, those emerging technologies are very big, very expensive, and probably beyond the means of a lot of cybercrime groups. But as things like quantum computing get cheaper and more readily available, they will be embraced by cyber criminals. And so we're simply going to have to work out a way to increase the levels of encryption to the point where they aren't breakable by quantum computing, or at least not by the quantum computing that those cyber criminals are using. So there's this constant sort of push me, pull you between the need to innovate, the desire to innovate, and what that does to the sort of traditional models and traditional security and privacy suite of tools that we've had at our disposal. The Lazarus Heist book comes out, published by Penguin on the 9th of June, 2022. And after that, excitingly, we have another series of the BBC World Service podcast, The Lazarus Heist. So even after the book, there's still loads of other stuff that's happened, that's being laid at North Korea's door. One of the recent hacks, a computer game called Axie Infinity, had $625 million stolen from it, allegedly by North Korean hackers. So that story keeps going and going and going. And thereafter, let's face it, cybercrime is not coming to a halt. So I'm sure there'll be lots of other stories to cover, both within the North Korean field and also outside it as well. We've obviously had the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation, and it's going to be interesting to see the fallout from that in terms of what Russia's cybercrime industry does about the restrictions that have been put on the country, about the way the country is perceived in the world, but more importantly, perhaps the sanctions that have been placed on Russian individuals and Russian organizations. Is the cybercrime economy in Russia going to be used to help subvert and evade those sanctions? If you look at the North Korean example, odds are seem to be yes, but we'll have to see how that goes out. So that's something I'm quite keen to get my teeth into after this current project.